before the world learned to fear the name Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, before headlines reduced him to a caricature of violence and excess, there was a quieter truth whispered only in the mountains of Sinaloa. In the late 1990s, while the Mexican government claimed control and rival cartels fought openly for territory, El Chapo ruled through something far more dangerous than brute force: absolute loyalty. It was during this fragile balance that a message arrived. 12 men had been selected, armed, paid, and given a single objective: eliminate El Chapo before sunrise. At this moment, if you enjoy stories that reveal what history tried to hide, we have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of this month. Subscribe, leave your like, and become part of this journey. The warning didn't come through a phone call or an intercepted transmission. It came from silence. Entire villages went quiet at once. No radios, no laughter, no dogs barking. For men like El Chapo, silence was louder than gunfire. He knew the pattern. 12 wasn't a random number. It was symbolic. A death squad large enough to overwhelm guards, small enough to move unseen. They were trained killers, some former soldiers, some mercenaries from rival factions who believed the rumors that El Chapo was vulnerable, distracted, weakened by paranoia. But what those men didn't understand was that El Chapo's greatest weapon was not fear. It was information. He knew who sent them. He knew who paid them. And more importantly, he knew why only 12 were chosen instead of an army. This wasn't a war declaration. It was a test, a message wrapped in bullets. And El Chapo intended to answer it in a language the underworld would never forget. As night fell over Sierra Madre, El Chapo made one decision that would later be spoken of only in fragments. He ordered his guards not to intercept the men, not to ambush them, not to kill them on sight. Instead, he gave a single instruction: let them come. The 12 men did not travel together. That was the first rule. They moved like ghosts through different routes carved into the Sierra Madre, some by foot, some on battered trucks with engines cut miles before the target, others riding mules guided by locals who never asked questions. Each man carried the same belief, that this was a simple extraction of a myth that had lived too long. El Chapo, they were told, was paranoid, hiding, surrounded by unreliable guards. What they were not told was that paranoia, in Guzman's world, was not weakness. It was discipline. Every trail they followed had already been walked by his scouts. Every shortcut they trusted had been mapped by men loyal enough to die without speaking. One by one, the 12 crossed invisible lines. Radios crackled when they shouldn't have. Batteries drained without explanation. One man, a former soldier, stopped suddenly when he realized the forest around him had gone silent. Not the peaceful silence of night, but the kind that happens when everything alive knows to hide. Another felt watched and turned his rifle toward the trees, firing a warning shot that echoed too loudly, announcing his presence to ears he would never see. Somewhere higher in the mountains, a man marked his position with a simple hand signal. No words were spoken. None were needed. By midnight, fear began to replace confidence. The men had been promised a prize, yet every step felt anticipated. One of them disappeared entirely. No scream, no gunfire, no struggle. Just absence. The others told themselves he had turned back, that he was weak, that this changed nothing. But in truth, something had already changed. They were no longer hunters moving toward a target. They were pieces being repositioned on a board they could not see. El Chapo's empire did not announce itself with explosions. It closed quietly like a fist. As dawn approached, the 12 finally converged near the compound, convinced that whatever strange sensations followed them through the night would end with gunfire and victory. They believed the danger was ahead. None of them understood that the real danger was already behind them and beside them and above them. Somewhere in the dark, El Chapo waited, not with rage, but with certainty. And certainty, in the world of men who kill for money, is far more terrifying than fear. The compound did not look like a fortress. That was the first mistake. No towering walls, no visible guards, just a cluster of modest buildings resting against a mountain as if they belonged there. To the 12 men, it felt wrong. Powerful men were supposed to hide behind concrete and steel. This place hid behind normalcy. and normalcy in cartel territory was often the deadliest disguise of all. As the men took positions, signals passed silently between them. 2 on the ridge, for moving low through brush, the rest circling wide. The plan was simple. It always was. Simplicity is comforting to men walking toward violence. Then the ground shifted, not physically, but psychologically. One of the men reached the outer structure and found the door unlocked. Another noticed footprints leading away from the compound instead of toward it. A third swore he heard laughter somewhere inside the building. Faint and calm, as if whoever waited for them was not afraid at all. That was when doubt entered fully. Not panic. Doubt. And doubt spreads faster than fear. Inside the compound, there were no guards. No weapons on tables. No hurried movements. Just a single room with chairs arranged deliberately, like an invitation. On the far wall hung a photograph of El Chapo standing beside men long dead, men who had once believed they could challenge him. One of the 12 recognized the face in the photo and felt his mouth go dry. That man had been killed years earlier in a way no one ever explained. Seeing his image now felt like a warning delivered too late. Before anyone could speak, the doors behind them closed. Not slammed, closed gently, calmly. From the shadows, voices emerged, steady and unhurried. They did not shout commands. They spoke names. Real names. Full names. Fathers' names. Places of birth. Each man froze as his identity was stripped bare. This was not an ambush. This was a reckoning. And in that moment, every one of the 12 understood the same horrifying truth. El Chapo had not prepared to survive the attack. He had prepared to teach a lesson. No one reached for a weapon, not because they were restrained, but because instinct finally overruled training. Every man in that room understood the same unspoken rule of survival. You do not move until you understand the game. The voices continued, calm and precise, stepping closer without revealing faces. One by one, the 12 were separated, not dragged, not beaten, simply guided away as if resistance had never been an option. Hallways that had not existed moments before seemed to open naturally, swallowing men into darkness without struggle. The first scream came late, and it was brief, not the sound of pain, but of realization. After that, silence returned, thick and intentional. Those who remained began to understand the true cruelty of the trap. El Chapo did not need to kill quickly. Time itself was the weapon. Each man was left alone with the knowledge that someone else had already been judged, already been found wanting. In the underworld, uncertainty breaks men faster than violence. Hours passed, or minutes. None of them could tell. One man was brought back into the room shaking, unharmed, but emptied. He was placed in a chair, hands free, eyes wide. No one asked him questions. No one needed to. His silence spoke louder than any confession. He stared at the floor, whispering prayers that did not belong to his faith. The others watched him and felt something worse than fear, regret, not for coming, but for believing they were important enough to succeed. Finally, a figure stepped into the light. El Chapo himself, smaller than the myths, calmer than the rumors. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He looked at the remaining men the way a teacher looks at students who fail an exam they were never prepared to pass. He spoke once, quietly, with certainty that did not require repetition. 12 men had been sent. Only one was meant to leave. The rest had already served their purpose. El Chapo did not explain how he chose a survivor. That mystery was intentional. Power is strongest when its logic cannot be fully decoded. He walked slowly among the remaining men, studying them not as enemies, but as messages waiting to be delivered. One man avoided his eyes. Another stared too hard, trying to project courage that had already collapsed. A third whispered something under his breath, perhaps a promise, perhaps a curse. El Chapo stopped in front of none of them at first. He let the silence work. Silence had always been more obedient than bullets. When he finally spoke, it was not to accuse. It was to remind. He recounted names of alliances broken years earlier, shipments rerouted, loyalties bought and sold cheaply. He spoke of men who believed they were untouchable because they hid behind intermediaries and money. The 12, he said calmly, were never meant to succeed. They were proof. Proof that someone believed El Chapo could be reached so easily. Proof that someone underestimated memory, underestimated patience. Then he stopped behind one man, younger than the rest, less decorated, a man who had hesitated earlier, whose weapon had remained lowered longer than it should have. El Chapo placed a hand on his shoulder, not heavy, not threatening, almost reassuring. This one, he said, would leave, not because he was innocent, not because he deserved mercy, but because he would be believed. Fear only travels when it has a witness. The chosen man was given no celebration, no explanation, no comfort. He was told only one thing. He would walk out alone at first light, carrying a message that could not be altered, softened, or misunderstood. If the message was changed, there would be consequences that reached farther than the sender imagined. The man nodded, unable to speak. He understood that survival had become a responsibility heavier than death. As dawn crept over the mountains, the compound opened its gates for the first and only time that night. One man stepped out into the light. 11 stories ended in silence. And somewhere far away, powerful people would soon learn that El Chapo had answered their test. The man who walked out did not run. He didn't look back. He followed the narrow trail exactly as he was told, carrying no weapon, no proof, no blood on his hands. Only words that felt heavier with every step down the mountain. By the time he reached the first village, the sun was already high, and people watched him pass with eyes that measured distance, not curiosity. They could tell when someone had crossed a line and survived it. Survival changes the way a man occupies space. He delivered the message the way it was given to him. Precisely. No names added. No emotions removed. In a safe house hours away, he spoke to a man who spoke to another man who never spoke directly to anyone. The words traveled through layers of insulation meant to protect the sender. But insulation does not stop heat. It only delays it. The message was simple. The attempt was seen before it began. The 12 were accounted for. The test was answered. There would be no retaliation. No war. Just memory. Those who heard it understood the real meaning immediately. This wasn't a threat aimed forward. It was a warning aimed backward. It told of eyes already watching, of loyalties already mapped, of consequences already priced. The absence of violence was the violence. No bodies displayed. No videos leaked. No proof offered. In that world, restraint was the loudest declaration of dominance possible. The man was dismissed without ceremony. No payment. No protection. He was told to disappear, and he did, years later. People would argue about whether he ever truly escaped the shadow of that night. But one thing was certain. He never spoke of it again. He didn't need to. The message had already done its work. Far from the mountains, powerful men recalculated. Meetings were postponed. Orders quietly rescinded. Plans rewritten. The silence that followed was not peace. It was respect enforced by memory. And at the center of it all, El Chapo returned to being unseen, having reminded the world of a truth it preferred to forget. Some empires don't expand through chaos. They endure through control. The weeks that followed felt unnaturally calm to those who understood how the underworld breathed. No retaliations. No leaked footage. No sudden disappearances tied directly to the failed attempt. That absence became the story. In cartel circles, where violence is usually used to announce conclusions, the lack of it sent a sharper signal. Everyone knew something decisive had happened in the mountains, yet no one could point evidence. That uncertainty forced caution. Routes were changed. Meetings were delayed. Men who once spoke confidently began choosing their words with surgical care. El Chapo had not expanded his territory that night, but he had fortified something far more important. Inevitability. Rumors multiplied in fragments. Some said the 12 never reached the compound. Others claimed they would turn on each other. A few whispered that El Chapo had never even been there, that the entire event was orchestrated through lieutenants alone. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was consistency. Every version ended the same way. Only one man walked out, and he carried a message that rewired decision-making across rival networks. In criminal economies, perception becomes policy, and policy dictates survival. Government intelligence picked up the tremor, but misunderstood its source. Analysts looked for spikes in violence that never came. They searched for bodies that were never found. The absence of noise confused institutions built to measure chaos, not restraint. El Chapo's name appeared less in reports for a time, and some interpreted that as weakness. Those closer to the ground knew better. Silence, when earned, is not retreat. It is consolidation. Within his own organization, nothing was celebrated. No stories were told. Loyalty was reaffirmed not with speeches, but with continuity. Shipments moved. Payment arrived on time. Families were left untouched. That night in the mountains became a reference point that was never named but always understood. When someone suggested reckless action, another would simply say, "Remember the 12," and the room would go quiet. Years later, when El Chapo's name would dominate headlines, courtrooms, and documentaries, no official record would ever mention the 12 men sent into the mountains at night. There were no case files, no photographs, no missing persons reports tied together. History prefers clean narratives, arrests, escapes, convictions. What happened in the Sierra Madre didn't fit into any of those categories. It existed in the space between fear and respect, where real power lives quietly. Those who truly understood the criminal world knew that this night marked a shift, not because El Chapo became more violent, but because he proved he no longer needed to be. The attempt on his life was not the first, nor the last, but it was the one that ended a certain kind of ambition. After that, enemies no longer tried to strike directly. They circled, they waited, they negotiated. The idea of sending men blindly into his territory died there, alongside 11 untold endings. The man who walked out was never seen again in any meaningful way. Some said he crossed the border and lived under another name. Others believe he vanished by design, erased not by violence but by permission. In cartel folklore, he became less a person and more a symbol, the witness. The reminder that survival itself can be weaponized when guided by someone who understands psychology better than bloodshed. As for El Chapo, he returned to the shadows, letting the world argue about his legend while he operated in reality. The message delivered that morning did exactly what it was meant to do. It traveled without distortion, without spectacle, and without denial. 12 men were sent. Only one walked out. And everyone who mattered understood why no one ever tried it that way again.